Hey, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Michael. I am the pastor for discipleship here at the Passage, and Matt likes to let me preach every once in a while so that you guys realize how good of a preacher he is. So it's just like a little, like you wouldn't know that you enjoyed the sunshine if it wasn't for the rain. So what we're going to do today is we are going to lean on the Word, right? Because the Word stands on its own. We're continuing Exodus, so if you want to go ahead and flip to Exodus chapter 5, kind of the course that we've charted here through Exodus is to take larger chunks of the book to kind of give us a bigger overview of what's going on, to hit some of the kind of the highlight themes of what's happening. It's definitely a challenge to preach. It's not like how I would normally like to do this because it's a lot of material to cover. Like as I was studying this week, I was like, okay, so what if we just camp out in the first 3 verses for a couple of weeks? So like there's a lot here. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pick up this story where we left off last week. So we've been introduced to the main characters. We've met Moses. We've met Aaron. We've kind of heard the story of how God is going to redeem His people Israel out of slavery, out of Egypt. And we're starting to pick up on this theme of mission, right? So Matt talked last week a lot about living on mission, and we see a lot of God's mission in the book of Exodus, that He is going to be the initiator, right? He's going to go. He has a people, the seed of Abraham, right? That he has cared for, that He brought into the land of Egypt 400 or some odd years before to protect them from famine. And while they've been there, they've been enslaved, but He is going to go and get His people and bring them out and bring them to the promised land. And this is all a pretext. This is all a type for the gospel that's going to come, right? It's all looking forward to what Jesus is going to do in the New Testament for all of us, right? So the seed of Abraham is not just Israelites, but it's everyone who believes in Jesus, right? So it's all looking forward to that, but God is setting the stage for us in Exodus. As I was studying this week, there was this thing. I've been thinking about this for a while because I stumbled upon this weeks ago. It's this thing called imposter syndrome. Who's heard of it? Right? Anyone? Yeah, it's on social media a little bit, right? And so I was like, what is this imposter syndrome? So I'll define it. I kind of have a loose definition up here for you. This is not. I don't think imposter is like defined in like medical textbooks, right? It's more of just like a phenomenon that we've discussed or discovered. But an imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as an imposter. And some of you are like, hey, I know what that is, right? That's not so mysterious, right? So when I read about that, I was like, man, I love it when science and psychology catches up with the Bible. It's really cool. Because what we see here is that we as a culture have latched onto this idea that we don't like feeling out of place. We don't like feeling that, hey, I'm being asked to do something that seems beyond me. And what's cool is when you hear people talk about imposter syndrome, it's people that are like highly successful, right? Like they're doing big things, running big companies, like they are succeeding by the world standards, right? And they'll say they have imposter syndrome, right? Like how can this be my job, right? How can I be the one that's doing this, right? I'm not qualified for this. It's kind of that feeling. I've also realized that this goes 2 ways as well. This is like a positive framing of this question, but there's also another kind of imposter syndrome where you don't doubt you don't like have skills and abilities that you doubt. It's that you think you have skills and abilities that you don't, right? So this does track 2 directions, right? So I'll let you self-diagnose. I'm not here to throw stones, right? Because I'm guilty of both. But what I love about phenomena like this, where, like I said, where culture and psychology catches up with the Bible, is that this is helping us see human nature in action, right? That everyone is searching to kind of what the words that I use to describe it are like this. It's like this golden nugget mentality that everyone thinks that there's like deep down in here somewhere, there's like this little golden nugget that I just need to find, and when I find it, when I unlock my true self, I'll be happy, right? That's what this is saying, right? That there's something down inside here that I need to be my true self. What we're really looking for is we're looking to be self-assured, right? We're looking for meaning. We're looking for significance. This is what this highlights, right? But the problem is, like I'm saying now, is we always look inward, right? Anytime we're faced with something that's kind of beyond us or outside of our comfort zone, we think, okay, I've got it in me to do it. That's the exact wrong response. And that's what we're going to see in our text today. If you were with us last week and you heard Matt walk us through chapters 3 and 4 of Exodus, we've met this character Moses, and he's got a lot going on, right? He was a Hebrew boy who was born during a time where Pharaoh was killing all the Hebrew baby boys. And his mother saved him by floating him down the river in a basket, right? So God miraculously preserves him. He ends up growing up, as he was found by one of Pharaoh's daughters. He was brought into the palace, and he was raised in the palace, right? And now after committing a murder, right, to defend an Israelite who he knows that he is, right? So don't think like the Prince of Egypt movie where it's like it's a big mystery that he's a Hebrew. Like, he's obviously Hebrew. He doesn't look Egyptian, so it's no one's fooled by this, right? So he commits a murder trying to defend an Israelite, and then he realizes, like, not only are the Egyptians upset with him, but the Hebrews don't like him either because he's kind of like this blood trader guy who's grown up in luxury while they've been slaves, and so he flees, right? And then God, while he's out in the Midianite desert, calls him to this crazy mission that we're just discussing, that God is going to set his people, he's going to set the seed of Abraham, he's going to set Israel and the Hebrews free from slavery, and who's he going to use to do it? Moses. And Moses does not like this idea. Like, he's not cool with this. He's like, literally anyone else, Lord. So what we'll realize is that Moses is suffering from a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? He is unaware of how God has uniquely shaped him. He's unable to see how God has uniquely molded his life for a purpose and for a task. So let me give you a little roadmap for what we're going to do here this morning. We're gonna walk through. We've been walking through the story a little bit. I'm gonna kind of pick and choose here some verses through 5 and 6. We're gonna look at Moses. We're gonna look at his life. We're gonna look at 3 areas where Moses displays for us that he is seeking his value and his significance and his assurance outside of the proper channel, which is from the Lord, right? So we're going to look at 3 examples from the scriptures. We're going to kind of do some application throughout, and then we're going to wrap up with talking about missional obedience, all right? So just hang on with me. We're going to be exclusively in Exodus. You don't have to, we're not going to be flipping around a lot, but we will be kind of scanning. I'll give you the references if you like to take notes. So let's dig in here. So let's go to the next slide if you don't mind, Josh. What we've got here is Moses is having an identity crisis, all right? We kind of talked about how he doesn't really fit anywhere. He's not really sure who he is. He's not really sure what's going on. The first area that Moses is asking this question is, who am I? All right? So Moses he's grown up. You'll notice I have this little handy-dandy Venn diagram here. He's a Hebrew, right? Born to a Hebrew family, but he was rescued by Pharaoh's daughter and has grown up in the Egyptian palace. But then he had to flee because he murdered somebody, which is, good time to flee, I guess. He fled into the Midianite desert, and he's married to a Midianite woman, Zipporah. So Moses is asking all these questions. When God calls him to this task of like, hey, I'm going to use you to accomplish something really big. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you as my emissary. I'm going to send you as my ambassador to Pharaoh, and you're going to get him to let my people go. And Moses is like, I don't think you understand. Like, I'm not the guy. What Moses is struggling with is he doesn't know where he fits, right? He's having this identity crisis because he doesn't think he's not really Hebrew because he didn't grow up with Hebrews, right? He's not really Egyptian because, well, he's not genetically or he's not ethnically an Egyptian, but he did grow up in the house, right? And he's not really Midianite. He's just living with those people. So he feels like this guy who's caught between 3 cultures, and Moses has this misconception that he has to belong solely to one group in order to belong, right? So he's seeking his validation and his belonging from some sort of cultural identity, right? So he's having this question of who am I? There's another question that Moses is asking himself is why me, right? So I've kind of boiled this down to like survivor's guilt. I don't know if you think about this, but Moses has kind of had a crazy story. So Moses is, think about who he is. He is a Hebrew who should have died, right? So there's this whole generation of Israelites who were defined by this period where Pharaoh killed thousands and thousands of baby boys. But we can't miss out. Like that's a defining thing. That's something that as a people, Israel will have a hard time escaping from, right? And Moses is one who survived, right? Not only is he one who survived, because maybe there are some boys who survived, because, theoretically, like he has a brother, Aaron, right? Who've been about the same age, but like Moses is one not only who survived that genocide, but where did he grow up? He grew up in a palace, right? He had access to, it was the nicest place to live in the world at the time, under the most powerful king in the world at the time. He had all the resources, all the education, right? He would have had, by any stretch of the imagination, a luxurious life. And I can't help but think that Moses' identity and some of the reasons he's having these questions is because he has this survivor's guilt, and he thinks, well, like, I know I'm not an Egyptian because obviously, like, I'm a Hebrew, but I'm not a Hebrew because those people won't accept me either, right? He doesn't know who he is. And this survivor's guilt, he's asking himself, why me? Like, why did this have to happen to me, right? Why couldn't I just be like a normal person, right? Why do I have to be the guy? And he's asking himself a third question too, and this really relates to the murder that he committed, right? So in a fit of rage, right, he sees a fellow Israelite being beaten by an Egyptian foreman, and he goes and he strikes down that Egyptian and kills him, hides the body. He thinks he got away with it, and then he sees two Hebrews arguing a little bit later, and he kind of tries to go and break up that fight because he wants to be you can tell he wants to be a part of the people, but he's not sure how. So he tries to break up this argument, and one of the Israelites says to him, "Oh, what are you going to do? You're going to kill me and hide my body like you did the Egyptians?" So he realizes there's a little bit of shade coming at him from the other side too. So Moses has this overwhelming guilt, right? So he knows he's guilty of this sin. He's guilty of murder, and so he flees, right? What can we attribute that to except for he's asking this question, how can anyone accept me? How can God accept me, right? Like I'm guilty. I'm a murderer, right? These are all things that are playing into who Moses is and the questions that he's asking himself. So where we find ourselves, Josh, you can hit me with the next slide, please, is Moses is asking these questions, and they're all factoring in to this moment where we met Moses last week, where he comes before the Lord, he gets called in and he sees the burning bush, right? And God calls him to this huge task. And so behind all those questions that Matt gave us last week, you remember Matt gave us the yeah buts, right? I love that, right? Moses got a case of the yeah buts. So he got a case of yeah, but like I don't speak well, or yeah, but I'm not the guy, or yeah, but I don't want to. Like that's kind of where Moses was at. So the Lord has called Moses to this huge task, and Moses is realizing something, that it's beyond him, right? He has all this baggage in his background. He has all these identity issues that he's trying to overcome. And so I think I want to call your attention to something cultural here, and kind of the point of where we're headed today is that I've heard this phrase a lot, where people will say, "God will never give you more than you can handle." Y'all heard that, right? That's a lie. All right. I just want to be straight up with you. Like, if you hear someone say that, be like, wrong. Because what is happening here, right? Who has God picked for this very enormous task of setting his people free from Israel? Did he pick, like, the guy with, like, the perfect resume, right? Did he pick the guy with, at least without a criminal record? No, didn't even do that, right? God has set Moses up for this impossible task, and Moses is realizing that it's beyond him, right? And where does he look when he realizes this task is beyond him, right? He's like, there's no way I can do this. Moses immediately starts to go, I can't do this because me, because look at all of the limitations I have, right? Look at all the things I don't bring to the table, right? You need someone that can do these things, God. What's the biggest one that he harps on is my speech, right? Like, God, I can't talk to Pharaoh. I can't talk to the Hebrews. I'm not good, right? So what I want to remind you is that God will absolutely give you more than you can handle. Like, that's literally the point. Like, that's what suffering and trials are. God is in the business of handing you more than you can handle. Why? Because he wants a specific response from us. And it's to say, you know what? I know I can't do it. It's not within me to accomplish this task. It's not within me to raise Christian children, right? I think about that a lot. I got 4 kids at home. I'm like, how do I make sure these kids believe in Jesus? Well, I can't guarantee that, right? I can't. That's a work of God. I think about my work as a pastor. Like, how can I make sure, how do we have more baptisms, right? How do we have more people sharing the gospel? Like, I think about these things all the time. I can't do that. That's a task that is beyond me. But who is it not beyond? It's not beyond God. And that's the response that God is trying to draw out of Moses. And I think by extension, that's the response that God is trying to get out of us as we read and we see this text. And of the many things that we could take away from these two very loaded chapters of Exodus, I think this is one theme, is that God is going to consistently look at Moses and say, when Moses says, I can't do this, and God says, I know, watch me. That's what he's doing. So what I want to do now is I want to go through 3 examples in our text, right? And I'm actually cheating because I'm going back to chapter 4 a little bit. Matt said I had to preach from chapter 5, but he's not here, so we can do whatever we want, right? So I'm going to go back and touch on a very strange scripture that he actually skipped over last week, so it's not really cheating. He cheated by not talking about it. So we're going to go back to chapter 4. We're going to be in chapter 4, 24 through 26. So if you need to flip back, you can do that. And then we're going to be in 6:12, and then we're going to be in 7, 1 through 7. Josh, will you advance the slides for me? I need to be reminded of where I'm at. Okay, cool. So we got a scripture coming up. All right, so what I want to do is I want to look at Moses' response here. I want to pick apart Moses' character a little bit and dig into this theme really quickly. Okay, so what we see here is in Exodus chapter 4, towards the end, starting in verse 24, is we're going to see how Moses is seeking his validation outside of the Lord, and we see it in this scripture. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to parse it out together because it's kind of cloudy. Okay, and there's a lot more here that we don't have time for. So if you have questions, you can email me. I'll give you some context. So Moses has already seen the Lord. He's already been commanded to go out. They're taking a trip. They're getting ready to go to Egypt. Verse 24. On the trip, at an overnight campsite, it happened that the Lord confronted him, that's Moses, and intended to put Moses to death. Okay, this took a turn suddenly, right? You went from the dude that I'm going to send to, all right, it's time, you're done. What could have prompted this? Well, Moses' wife comes to save the day. Way to go, guys, all right? So Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin, surprise, threw it at Moses' feet and said, you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So God let him alone. So he let him alone. It's God let Moses alone. And at that time, she said, you are a bridegroom of blood, referring to the circumcision she just performed on her firstborn. All right, so there's a lot going on here, but I want to call your attention to this fact, that Moses, a Hebrew, who's the seed of Abraham, knows he's a Hebrew, has a son, and knowing that he's of the seed of Abraham, and knowing that the command that God gave to Abraham, that a sign of the covenant that God has given to his people is that they will circumcise their sons on the 8th day. What has Moses not done here? He's not done that. All right, and this tells us a lot, but what we want to zoom in on here is the fact that we want to ask the question, why has Moses not done this, right? Because that's the thing that we have to assume, that because Zipporah somehow knew that God was upset with Moses and was going to put him to death, so she was in on that conversation, right? She recognized the problem, that Moses had not yet consummated the covenant that he was supposed to have with this living God that he's going out to represent, and that's why God was mad at him and wanted to put him to death in the first place. Because Yahweh had this understanding that, like, hey, Moses, I'm sending you out as my messenger. You better get the externals right. You need to look the part. And if you are so worried about fitting in where you are that you're not even going to obey the covenant of my people, of which you are one, why would God not be upset with him, right? But this highlights for us Moses' issue that he's not fully entering into the covenant relationship with the Lord. This is just basic hypocrisy, right? That Moses knows he's a Hebrew, but he's refusing to consummate that covenant. So he's not obeyed the law. And so Zipporah steps in, does it for him. Thanks, honey, right? Thanks for saving my life. But it tells us where Moses is at, right? That his life is not in alignment with who God is saying he is and who he knows he is. Guys, this is, like I said, it's just basic hypocrisy, and some time for some application here. Maybe this is where some of us are in the room today. That we are seeking to be used by God. We want to be in a relationship with God, but we are refusing to get our external life in alignment with God's values, right? We're refusing to enter into the covenant to say, all right, God, I want to follow you, and because you say to do something, I'm going to do it. It's basic obedience, right? What could that look like? I mean, it looks like things like just prioritizing worship on Sunday, like making this a thing that we don't miss, right? Why? Because God has commanded it. Because it's good. Because it's good for you and it's good for your community. Because it calls you back to the gospel every week, right? Maybe it's your life, right? Maybe you're here on Sundays, but you're living like you're not a Christian during the week. Maybe you're abusing alcohol. Maybe you're regularly looking at pornography. Maybe you're using terrible foul language at work, and you're crude, and you're not representing Christ well, right? Think about these things. This is the basic kind of life stuff where Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. He says, why do we have to keep coming back to the milk? I want you to move on to meat, right? Paul is saying, I want you to move on to pursuing holiness, not just trying to not live in sin. Paul is calling us to, hey, shed the weight that so easily encumbers, as the author of Hebrews 4 says, right? This is what God is saying to Moses right here, and this is what Moses was failing to do. He's failing to bring his life into alignment with God's standards, right? So we need to be aware of that. You need to evaluate that, and then ask the question, why? Why is that not happening, right? Because maybe it's the second issue, right? Okay, so I'm going to skip here quickly. We're going to go, what happens is Moses and Zipporah, they go on their trip. Aaron comes with them, so they go to Pharaoh. They go into Pharaoh. They have their first audience with him, and this is the beginning of chapter 5, and Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh, hey, Yahweh says you got to let his people go so they can worship. And Pharaoh just stops just short of laughing at them, right? He's kind of like, what? Like, no. Like, I have hundreds of thousands of slaves that are working for me, building and making bricks all the time, and you want to take them away just for free, right? Pharaoh is so upset with this request that he says, you know what? This doesn't have anything to do with about worshiping God, because Pharaoh says, I don't recognize him as God. I don't know who that God is. He says, this is just about being lazy. You just don't want to work. I understand. So for your laziness, you know what Pharaoh does? He makes their labor even harder, because during their brick making, the Egyptians used to supply them with straw. And Pharaoh says, not anymore. So now Pharaoh has made the Israelites' lives even harder. He's kept the quantity of bricks they're supposed to produce every day the same, but now they have to go out and get the straw themselves. Who else do you think is upset with Moses? Yeah, so Pharaoh's a little mad. If Pharaoh's mad, the Israelites are even more mad, right? And so when Moses and Aaron go to talk to the Israelites, they're like, bro, would you just go? Like, you said this whole thing was about getting us free, but now we have more work. So we're not digging this, so you can take your whole promised land thing and keep it, because we'd rather just not have to make things any worse, right? And so then Moses goes back to the Lord and basically says, Lord, this is what I was worried about, right? This is what I was worried was going to happen. That I was going to go do this, things were going to get worse, I knew I wasn't the guy. What are you even doing, God? So Moses goes back to God and starts questioning him. So then we get to chapter 6, verse 12. And Moses says that, we'll actually start at 10 here. I think I have that one, yeah. So it says, 10 here, it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses. He said, go and tell Pharaoh. So he reminds him, hey, just do what I said, all right? And watch what I'm going to do. So he says, go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go from this land. And then verse 12, but Moses said in the Lord's presence, if the Israelites will not listen to me, then how will Pharaoh listen to me, since I am such a poor speaker? Okay. Poor speaker is a fine translation for that word. But I want to propose something here. The word that's actually used there is, I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. What was the last thing we just talked about? What was Moses' issue, right? He'd not circumcised his son, right? He'd not entered into the covenant with God. I can't help but think there's more to this word than just Moses has a stutter. I'm not saying Moses didn't have a stutter, because there's a lot of scholars out there that say they do, and I don't want to be the only one saying no, and I'm not. There's other people who. I want to maybe flesh this out a little bit more and think there's more going on in this statement. There's more going on in Moses' heart when he says that. I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. I think what Moses is hinting at is he's reminding God, he's like, hey, I know I was out of line with that whole not circumcising my son thing. I want to be in covenant with you, but like, how can I possibly be the guy? Like we go back to that Venn diagram, right? We talked about where Moses doesn't know where he sits. He's not Hebrew, he's not Egyptian, he's not Midianite. He doesn't know who he is. I think that's what this word is getting at. That Moses sees himself as like he's not holy enough, he's not Hebrew enough, he's not respectable enough, he's just not enough. I am not your man. I'm not a man with circumcised. I'm not a man who in my speech and on my insides is who you need me to be, God. What is Moses doing here? He's doing the exact same thing, right? He's saying, oh man, this task is really hard. It didn't go the way I thought it would go. Whose fault is it? It's mine. And it's because I don't have in here what it takes. But what does God say to him? But he just says, go and watch and see. Watch what I'll do, right? Moses is having the wrong response. He's thinking, I can't do it. And God's like, duh, I know you can't, right? I know you can't do it. It's not about you. Stop looking at you and look at me, right? And here's what's cool. So benefit of the doubt here. I'm pretty sure Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. He includes it, so he's writing the story about himself, so he's got a little self-reflection going on. What happens right after this? If you look down at chapter 6, there's this genealogy, right? So as Moses is thinking, like, I'm not your man, like I'm not the guy, like I'm not enough of the kind of person you need me to be. He includes this genealogy, and what does it do? But it traces the lineage back from Jacob, from Israel, all the way down to Moses and to Aaron. What is that doing but reminding us, and Moses reminding us, that we are not the culmination of ourselves, but God is fulfilling, he's fulfilling what he wants in us, right? We don't determine what we're going to be or what we're going to do. God does. Because did Moses choose to be born into this line of people? Did he choose to be born? No. God did that. This is God's plan. It's not Moses' plan. So it's not up to him to make it succeed. So Moses needs to quit looking inward to find that little golden nugget, like, oh, I can do this. I got it. God hasn't given me more than I can handle. No, he absolutely has, Moses, and you need to look to him as the fulfillment of the work that God says he's going to do. The final thing here, so that's extra. The first one was external obedience. The second one was internal. I want to look at one final thing here to see God's response to all of this. So if we go to we read through the genealogy in chapter 6. Aaron and Moses, they're like, okay, we'll do it. Fine, you've convinced us, right? And if we go down to the beginning of 7, we see. We kind of recap the question that Moses asked, which was like, it says, if the Israelites will not listen to me, then how will they listen to Pharaoh? They rephrased that question at the beginning of 7. The Lord answers Moses, see, I've made you like, or he says, but Moses replied in the Lord's presence, since I am such a poor speaker, how will the Pharaoh listen to me? So it's the same question. Listen to God's response to Moses. The Lord answered Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. And Aaron, your brother, will be your prophet. And you must say, to whatever I command you. Then Aaron, your brother, must declare it to Pharaoh so that he will let the Israelites go from this land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh will not listen to you, but I will put my hand into Egypt and bring the military divisions of my people, the Israelites, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. Look at what God is saying. But I will. So the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the Israelites from among them. So Moses and Aaron did this. They did just as the Lord commanded them. Guys, I want to point out one very simple phrase in this whole thing where the Lord says, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. Guys, this says something about how God sends his people out. He doesn't just send Moses out with a message, right? What does he say? I'm not sending you with some information to deliver. I am sending you as the message. You are the message. That's why it's so important for the Lord that Moses gets his life in order, right? Because he can't be looking to external things to show him that he's enough. He can't be looking at internal things to show him that he's enough. Who does he have to be looking at? He has to be looking at the Lord. And this is where I think we, as the church, we can really talk about, we can really dig in on this. guys, I think we have, as a church, a long way to go in adopting this same type of thinking, right? Because if you think about it, if my job as a Christian, as a Christ follower, when I read the Great Commission, is to just go and deliver some words to somebody, then I could just write it on a letter and send it to somebody. Or I could just go, kind of like Jonah, and just like, here's the message, and dip out. But what God is saying is, I'm not sending you just with some words, but I'm sending you as the message. That means you have to, in all that you are, internal and external, you have to be bought in. And that requires something. That requires a level of surrender that God is leading Moses into right now. And that's what I question for us, folks. I want us to really dig in and think, have I really bought in to this message of the gospel? Have I looked at Jesus and said, you know what? Yeah, I'm all in. Like all in. Not like, okay, I'll come check it out, but like, I'm still gonna do this thing because I like it, or I'm not gonna do that because I don't want to. But like, have you looked at Jesus and said, what Jesus has done for me on the cross is so supremely valuable and so supremely worthy of my entire being, of all my devotion, that I'm going to throw everything that was me in the trash, and I'm going to be the new me that God defines me as, right? I'm going to look to the Lord for my validation. I'm going to look to the Lord for my significance. I'm going to look to him as my source of truth and light. That's what it means to be a Christ follower, and that's what it means to be God's messenger. So if you're here today and you're asking the question of yourself, like, what does God want from me? You can't quite find like what that next step is, or maybe you think like, I just feel stuck. I just feel hung up. I just want you to like briefly consider the possibility that maybe you've not surrendered to him, that maybe what you want is some version of your own plans and God to sign off on it. If that's the case, friends, there's one response, and it's repentance. And that's where God's leading Moses. He's leading Moses to this place of humility and brokenness where he's gonna realize, like Moses is gonna say, right, God, I can't do it. And you knew that, but you can do it. And that's the message of the gospel for us today. We can't do it, but God can. It makes me think of Matthew, where Jesus says, he has this long section of teaching, and he talks about the rich person being saved, right? It says it's more likely for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to make it into heaven. And the disciples are like, what? Who can be saved then, right? And Jesus just says, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. Don't corrupt that and think that's, if I believe hard enough, like I can do anything. That's not what that's about. It's about the fact that for your salvation to occur, it's nothing that you can do. It's what God has already done. And it requires a response. And that's the response that God's calling us to this morning. And that's the message that God is calling us to proclaim as we go, right? For you to be the entire message. For your whole life to line up and say, like, yes, Jesus is the foundation that I have built everything on. We constantly tell ourselves, and we tell God, like, look at me, I can't do this. Like, I think of folks that I ask, like, hey, I think you should serve in this way. I think you'd be a great missional community leader. Like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Who are you looking at? You're looking at yourself. Who do you need to be looking at? You need to look at God, because he's saying, yeah, stop looking at you and look at me, because I can do it, and I'll do it through you. Just watch. God says that twice in our text this morning, in 6 and 7. He says, you will see what I will do. So that's my challenge to you this week, church, is trust the Lord. Look at him and see what he'll do. See what he'll do in your life. When you move your whole life and place it on the solid rock that is Jesus, right? Bring everything into alignment. Say no to the world, yes to Jesus.